One day, the hero, faced with soul-destroying black magic, fell into a deep sleep, leaving his companions behind. And 300 years have passed since then. But the restored peace and calm everyday life were only an illusion. And now the whole world is shrouded in darkness. 300 years ago, when the main character turned 31, one hero came to the magic tower for him. The girl said that she had heard that once every 100 years a genius magician appears, and she asked him if it was him, calling him a boy. Archmage Lynn just looked at the girl silently, slamming the book he was holding in his hand shut. Still silent, he approached the bookshelf and, under the gaze of the stranger, put it away from the shelf. Ignoring the girl behind him, Lynn began to sort through the books that were lying on the floor, and the girl decided to call out to him, asking him if he could hear her at all. With a stone face, the guy replied that he was neither a genius nor a child, and his name was Lynn. The girl beamed and ran up to the guy, saying that he really was the youngest 4-star archmage in history, and she said that she had come to the right place then. She smiled, looked at the boy's back and said that he was still a child. Laughing, she said that it was hard to call him a genius magician when he still needed to change diapers. She continued asking him to join her party, and then she would change them for him every day. Lynn turned around with a dark face. A fireball was shining in his hand. The girl immediately tried to back away, shouting at him not to rush in such a hurry because she was only joking. Without looking where she was going, the stranger crashed headfirst into a bookcase. The books that stood in tall stacks on the cupboard swayed and fell down like rain. The orb in Lynn's hand went out, and he stared at the stranger who was buried under those books. Seeing such a sight, the guy could not help but smile and laugh. The girl climbed out of the books and laughed too, and that's when Lynn became interested in her. The girl introduced herself by saying that her name was Esther Alter Chiprin, and she said that she was a fake warrior of the Heavenly Light Dragon Church. Esther asked Lynn to help her defeat the void spreading from the young pole. In other words, she invited him to join her group of heroes. Esther's group already included 2 famous people, the famous archer of the Kaya's Empire and the fire dragon priestess from the Dragon Republic, Frida. In response to this proposal, Lynn told Esther that he did not want to die, to which the girl asked who did. The guy asked the girl if he was as interested in those 2 as she was. Esther laughed and replied that they were as crazy as she was. But there was something even more interesting. When Lynn asked her what it was, the girl replied that it was peace, a word that caused a strange dissonance in Lynn, a man who had studied magic in the tower after being rescued from the slums. He had a goal to become the highest-ranking mage in the Empire, a 7-star rank mage. It was said that if you reached the 7th star, you could see the truth of the world. And Lynn wanted to reach a dimension where no one had ever stepped before. Living here and reading books about magic for the rest of my life wouldn't be bad. But to reach the 7th star, he needed to know about the world outside the magic tower. However, aimless travel seemed tiresome to him, and he wondered whether he needed it at all. And then this clumsy heroine appeared and offered him to save the world. And this unexpected offer was enough to pull him out into the outside world. Even though he didn't have a burning sense of justice to save the world, he accepted it. Kays was an archer whose accuracy dropped catastrophically without drink. He was also mute. Frida the priestess was a heavy smoker. She said that, as a priestess of the fire dragons, she should at least be able to cast a breathing spell. And then she would blow black smoke into Lynn's face, giving out a crazy laugh. After this, a monster could suddenly appear and attack with loud screams. And although the party members had their shortcomings, they were masters of their craft. This monster prepared to attack people, and its eye lit up with a green light. But before he could do anything, a bright flash of light had already curled up in Frida's hand, blinding him. And then a huge wave of fire headed towards the monster. The party was strong. The terrible monsters they encountered on their way and the minions of the abyss approaching the server were nothing to them. Esther often joked with Lynn. She would tell him not to dare fall in love with her. In the evening, she asked him when it would all end, and if he wanted to go on a trip with her. While Frida was fighting the bat, Esther nonchalantly told Lynn that she was afraid that he would be deceived by another girl, since he was so innocent. And thus, in the company of his companions, Lynn spent 5 years. As their journey to save the world from the abyss came to an end, Lynn's body began to show signs of erosion. This was the result of 5 years of being attacked by enemies. Before the final battle with the abyss, he was dying, consumed by the poison that poisoned his soul. Kays stared sullenly at the ground as Esther called out to Lynn, urging him to wake up. She asked Frida to do something, but she replied that she could not lift this curse. Tears streamed down Esther's face when she was told it could not be healed. The girl protested and screamed that Lynn could not die like that. But Lynn muttered that he did not want to die. Esther screamed that she knew. She would find a way, he just had to hold on. Suddenly, Lynn began to cough, drops of blood escaping from his mouth as he clutched his clothes tightly. Lifting his jacket, he showed his companions the seal on his chest, telling them not to worry too much. As it turned out, it was the tiny overlord's filter lapel, an immortality spell carved into his heart. It contained magic that would put his body into a dormant state and heal him. Lynn muttered a spell, and his body began to be covered in ice. He didn't know how long it would take him to revive, but it was the only option. Esther watched with wide eyes as ice covered the boy's body. Lynn tugged weakly at her cloak and told her that he would be back. He chuckled and asked her with all his might to win. Smiling, Esther promised that she would do it. She told him that no matter what, they must meet again. Taking his hands, she said with a smile that then the four of them would go see the world. She told him that she would be by his side until he woke up. Lynn smiled at her, promising that she would, and the ice had already reached his head. Lynn's consciousness was being pulled into the cold grip of death. He felt buoyant and empty, as if he was sinking into a swamp. Finally, he thought about the fact that he still couldn't see the truth from the magical system of the seventh star. Lynn sank deeper and deeper into oblivion. Meanwhile, Esther, Kaze, and Frida returned to the fight. Their journey together across the vast world ended here. It ended in front of the army of the Abyss, which rushed forward with terrible screams. All that was left in front of Lynn was darkness. But in an instant, he was already tired of floundering in the darkness. Lynn opened his eyes. A female voice came from the side asking him if he was okay, and the woman reflected back to him as Rain. Turning around at the sound of the voice, Lynn immediately addressed her as his mother. Lynn's appearance was now different. His hair was black and his eyes were red, and he looked like a teenager. Lynn immediately stopped short, thinking about where his mother came from, since he was an orphan, and the woman looked at him questioningly. A bright light shone somewhere to the side and Lynn covered his face with his hand, shielding himself from it. Looking around, he realized that he did not recognize these places. Next to him was not a battlefield, but a city and its crowd. The woman asked the boy why he was acting like that and said that it was Heroes' Square in front of the Vatican. The woman continued, saying that there was a monument there in honor of Esther's group. Hearing the familiar name, Lynn turned around and saw a statue in front of him. The monument contained the names and dates of life of all the members of Esther's group. Lynn asked the woman what year it was, and she simply asked him what was wrong with him. But Lynn didn't calm down and asked again what year it was. Exhaling, the woman replied that it was now 1418, according to the Teresian calendar. Hearing this year, Lynn's body became cold, and he began to wonder if he had been reborn, or if his memory had been superimposed on someone else's body. He noticed that the feeling in this body was very strange. The memories of Esther's laughter, Kaze's drunken delirium, and Frida's cigarette smoke were still fresh in his mind. But he realized with fear that all this had happened 300 years ago. With a trembling voice, Lynn asked if they had won the last battle, but he immediately thought that it was a pointless question. He thought that if they had not won, they would not have had a monument erected to them, and the sky would not have been so peaceful. With a heavy sigh, the woman asked him why he was saying such obvious things. And then she said that they said that now, if you climb the Vatican Tower, you can see the frozen remains of Lord Lynn. Lynn didn't ask any further questions but answered tensely that he understood. He wondered what it meant that he had taken over someone's body. The woman continued, saying that Lady Esther had remained by Lord Lynn's side until she died. She noticed that it was so beautiful and so sad, and then she asked the boy what he thought. Lynn, in response to this, laughed, sweating, and the woman asked him why he was laughing because it was a sad story. Remembering his last moments with Esther, he thought it was amazing that she had kept her promise. Lynn walked closer to the monument and reached out his hand to the plaque. As soon as he touched her, he pulled his hand back, thinking that someone had not kept their promise after all. Lynn burst into tears and said he had not kept his promise. Lynn didn't know what the three of them said about him next, but he became a historical figure. The emperor personally erected a monument to him. Many towers of magicians and families of magicians revered him as a saint, and Reina's mother watched her son with excitement. Lost in his thoughts, Lynn thought about how these 300 years had left him with only magic. They left him with memories of travels to many places and the faces of his comrades who smiled brightly at him. Now these adventures could be read about in books. Now these memories have become legends. He recalled that Esther had once said that moments become memories when they are shared with someone. So his memories are not yet memories. Until he dies and meets them, they will remain unshared. These are memories he must live with alone, like an unanswered echo. Noticing movement out of the corner of his eye, Lynn turned around and saw a cup of tea. Smiling, Lynn accepted the cup from Rain's mother. thinking that his friends were gone now, but they had left him this world. Looking at the cup, he thought about what he should do now, and then he remembered Esther again. Lynn's eyes widened, and he thought about what else he had to eat and work with. The Holy Human Empire divided the mage class into 7 levels. Eventually, Lynn reached the 5-star level of a mage. Only 2 people in the entire history of the empire had reached the 6-star level, known as a sage. Lynn thought that, one could say, they had not reached the end of the truth. But Raina's mother waved her hand at him, getting ready to leave. Seeing the outstretched hand, Lynn remembered Esther and thought that if he hadn't left with Esther, he would have reached the 6-star level and then grown old and died. But he would regret it all his life. Even if someone could turn back time, he would leave to travel with her again and again. But now Esther is gone. The girl hoped that this world would be filled with laughter. As Lynn followed her mother outside, she thought that this world, which they had all desperately defended together, was truly the way she wanted it to be. He remembered again that those who reached the end of magic would be able to see the true face of the world. So in this life, he must become a 7-star magician. Stopping again at the statue of his friends, he thought that in order to escape from this sadness and emptiness, he would try. He remembered Esther with a wide smile and flushed cheeks, calling him to look at the flower. He remembered Frida saying it was too romantic to show such things to a charmless brat. Kays only watched the flowers from the side. Lynn then shouted that he would rather read another magic book than look at this. He asked what was so wonderful about this flower field. Lynn thought that the people in Esther's group were all equally eccentric, but he really enjoyed traveling with them. Looking up at the sunset sky, Lynn in Rain's body said goodbye to his friends with a smile on his face. He thought that now they were left in the past and could not be together. The living, following the flow of time, must move into the future. Lynn had a dream where Esther asked him if he ever regretted not having a family, to which the guy replied that he didn't even know his mother. Lynn replied that he didn't even know what it was, so he wasn't interested. He grew up in the slums. If the headmaster of the school Osiris hadn't noticed his magical talent and taken him in, he would have lived as an orphan and died on the streets. Frida came up from behind and hugged the guy around the neck, saying that he was a poor thing. Lynn pushed her away, screaming that even if he had a family, he wouldn't know how to treat them, so he didn't need a family. Esther smiled at him, telling him it wasn't as difficult as he thought. She told him to just cherish them, but Lynn took the advice with a grain of salt. Esther smiled brightly, telling him that he was a good child so everything would work out for him. Lynn heard someone call him. He opened his eyes, waking up in Rain's body again. The maid entered the room, bowed, and said that she would prepare breakfast since he was awake. Stretching, Lynn walked over to the mirror and looked at his new face. Memories of this spoiled 9-year-old boy's old life returned only 20 days ago. This boy, Rain, is the eldest son of the Ludwig family, one of the 5 great families of magicians. Since Lynn himself is an orphan, he had to work hard to adapt to life in a noble family. Lynn entered the dining room and was greeted by the maid and Rain's mother. She asked him if he could go and tell his father that breakfast was ready. She said that he would be very glad if he came. Lynn smiled, not refusing. A couple of minutes later, he reached his father's office, where he was sitting at the table. Kevin Ludwig noticed his son and asked him if he hadn't had enough sleep. His face had a bad color. Ruffling his son's hair, he noticed that he still looked unwell after the journey. Looking at his father emotionlessly, Lynn told him that breakfast was ready. Kevin smiled and removed his hand, saying that this was the only reason he came here. Thanking him, he said that he could go eat first. Lynn asked the man if he was not going to have breakfast, to which he looked away at the table. There was a piece of paper with magical seals on the table. Kevin said that the dissertation presentation was next week, so he was in a hurry. The man said that his mind was foggy from eating, so he tried to concentrate and get as much done as he could in the clear morning hours. And looking at the paper, Lynn wondered if he was really stuck on this. He asked his father if he wanted him to help him. Kevin asked him if he wanted to support him, to which the boy replied that he wanted to help solve the magic circle. Kevin said that the help was welcome, but his mother would scold him if he was late for breakfast. But Lynn didn't listen to him and took the pen. As Lynn drew his pen across the paper, he said that magic was the expression of natural laws numerically and then their distortion. He said that the Go rune complicates the equation and conflicts with the hand Cha, so it is better to replace it with the Gu rune. When he finished writing, Lynn turned to his father and said that then, using the imperial equation 41:2, he would be able to get the answer immediately. Kevin picked up the paper, asking if such a method was possible. The man thought that this was a difficult problem that even the best scientists could not solve, and yet this was a high-level spell that was 200 years old. Looking up at his son in surprise, Kevin asked him how he had guessed. Digging through Rain's memories, Lynn realized that Rain, in terms of his knowledge of basic magic, was a completely ordinary person. However, given that he belonged to a line of mages, this meant that he did not inherit the talent for magic. Lynn did not answer his father's question and asked him if he could have breakfast with them now. Smiling, Kevin rushed to hug his son, saying that now they could all eat together. Raina's family was small: mother, father, 6-year-old sister. A little girl, Siri, looked into the room where her brother was sitting. Her hair and eyes were the same as Rain's. She was a sweet girl who inherited the traits of the Ludwig family. Lynn turned around, noticing someone's gaze on him. The girl flinched when she realized she had been noticed. Without thinking twice, she ran away. Lynn sighed heavily, thinking that such behavior was quite understandable. Because in Rain's memories, he was never kind to Siri. Instead of being cold, he was simply indifferent to everything. Lynn didn't think about it anymore and returned to his book. Esther's voice echoed in his head, telling him that he had to take care of them. He couldn't just run away. Lynn slammed the book shut, his teeth clenched in frustration, the words about him being a kind child echoing in his head again. Siri, who was standing behind the door, suddenly heard her brother call her, saying that he taught her magic. The girl looked out from behind the doorway uncertainly. Lynn asked her if she wanted to play together then, but instead of answering, Siri ran off somewhere again. Lynn sighed heavily, thinking that children were too difficult to deal with. But then, after a couple of minutes, the sound of little feet was heard. Siri walked up to her brother and handed him a book called The Basic Formula of One-Star Magic. Surprised, Lynn asked her if she was really reading this at 6, and the girl nodded happily. He looked again at the girl, who was now smiling excitedly. Esther's voice came back to him in his head, asking him if he knew the meaning of this flower. In another memory, she happily shouted that she would tell the story of a certain cliff. Lynn always complained that Esther treated him like a child, but in reality, he loved these moments more than anything in the world. Siri sat on her brother's lap and began to show what she didn't understand. Lynn began to explain to her that a house with a thatched roof and a brick house are different. It all depends on the materials. In magic, this role is played by a magical figure. The shape of a magical figure determines the attribute of magic. For example, if you draw a triangle, it will be the attribute of fire, the shape of a fan, the attribute of wind. Lynn continued by saying that the next step is runes. Runes determine the effect of magic, and runes are magic words. Yule means to bind, and Ho means to disperse. For example, if you engrave the Yule rune on a triangular magic square, you will get a spell of binding with the attribute of fire. Lynn said that it actually uses mathematical formulas. Siri innocently asked him what mathematical was. The guy looked back tiredly while the girl looked at him with interest, but he continued to explain anyway, deciding that they needed to go over addition and subtraction first. The servants who watched Lynn teach Siri said that Master Rain had changed completely, and someone remarked that he didn't care when Mistress Siri cried before. As they entered the room, Raina's mom and Kevin smiled at the sight that met their eyes. The woman said she wanted to capture the sight in a painting, and meanwhile Siri fell asleep, nestled comfortably in the lap of her brother, who was also sleeping. Kevin said the artist might not make it in time, and Siri is too shy, so it might be too much. Looking at the table, the man noticed a book and notes, and realized that his son was teaching his sister magic. He noticed that after returning from the square, Rain seemed like a completely different person, and the woman agreed with him, saying that his tone had suddenly become more mature. She asked worriedly if it was possible that the void had possessed him, to which Kevin replied that it was not like that. He said that he had a similar experience. He said that when he was still a student, he had the honor of meeting Lord Lynn. At that time, Kevin bragged that he had become a 3-star magician. But during the war, Lord Lynn rose to 5 stars. Living in the peaceful era that the heroes created, Kevin realized how complacent he had been. Perhaps Rain had the same thoughts. After leaving the room, Rain's mother asked if Lord Lynn was really frozen in time. Kevin answered that it was true. He had mastered ice magic perfectly, and that he remained the same as he was at 18 years old. The woman asked him to tell her more, to which the man replied that he didn't know anything else. Scratching his chin, Kevin noticed that the ice contained Lady Esther's magic. He said that only Lord Lynn and Lady Hester could have induced her. He said he suspected that this letter turned out to be Esther's bequeathed letter to Lynn, because one day he would still wake up. Kevin said he thinks their son is a genius. He said that he, moreover, could reach the level of a sage, because he had solved the magic square, which he himself had been struggling with for more than a year, and he had only looked at it. The woman exclaimed in amazement and asked the man if that was why he had come to breakfast today. Kevin said that was true, and he thought it might be a bit early, but it was time to teach him their family magic. Rain can become a mage thief who reads and steals any magic. This is only allowed to those who belong to the Ludwig family. This magic is only available to their lineage. The man said he wasn't sure if he could teach him, to which his wife asked if it was that difficult. The man replied that everything was fine. He already had an idea. Under a blue sky, a dazzling field of tulips stretches to the horizon. Cidius Tulica. It is a beautiful region famous for its tulips, and a third of its land belongs to the Ludwig family. Rising to a sitting position, Lynn said that if you want to develop, you need to set medium-term and long-term goals, especially if it is the path to truth. There is a lot to do to become a 7-star mage. No matter how young you are, there is no time to waste. Lynn placed a piece of paper in front of him and said that they needed to call the guide first. Siri appeared behind her brother and asked him what he was doing. The guy muttered that it irritated him so much. Sighing, he nevertheless answered, saying that he was going to call a magic guide. The girl asked again. The guy asked whether he and she should call him. The girl jumped up happily and shouted that she wanted one too. Watching Siri happily spinning around on the grass, Lynn thought that she seemed to be enjoying herself. But for a 6-year-old, her speech was a bit clumsy. Could there be something wrong with her? Following this, the guy began to draw on the sheet. Looking at his sister, he said that this was a high-level magic containing 4 different elements, so only a 4-star magician could handle it. There were only 10 of them in the country right now. Lynn finished drawing the elements and a bright light shone from the paper. A huge table of light shot into the sky and Sari jumped to her feet, screaming with joy. Suddenly, Lynn grabbed his chest. Blood suddenly started flowing from his nose and eyes. He muttered that it was still too much for 4-star magic. He thought that it was good that it was a summoning spell for a guide and not a combat spell. Otherwise, he would have died already. The pillar of light dissolved into thin air. Lynn muttered that this body was trash. He began to wipe away his blood with a handkerchief and called Rudian. A blue butterfly appeared and landed on Siri's finger. This butterfly evaluates the user's abilities and determines potential magical power. Lynn said that it was Rudian's function to tell her what to study and practice. He said that all the best runes for learning are collected here. It may seem simple, but it is 4-star magic. He asked his sister if she liked it, while she looked at the butterfly with a smile. Siri nodded her head. The girl ran away. Lynn told her that now she should go there and study. Suddenly, he felt dizzy and almost fell to the ground. Clutching his head, Lynn said that while he was recovering his strength, he would summon the second Rudian later. The second Rudian was summoned. He showed that the physical condition assessment, magical power, is 30-24. Lynn thought that this was the level of a beginner mage and began to calculate the magic and stamina. The magic calculation was 77, and the endurance was 64. The guy sighed and thought that he had a long way to go. But then he saw that a bloodline of magic had been discovered that was considered teachable. Lynn chuckled and said that this body wasn't complete trash after all. He remembered that when he was traveling with Esther, a young magician came to him. He wanted to prove himself as the best mage of all the mages in the Empire and join the group instead of Lynn. However, there was nothing special about his skills. With just one blow, Lynn could have completely defeated him. Looking at the defeated guy, Lynn became even more convinced that there was nothing special about his skills. However, the guy's eyes, sparkling with a bright light, did not give him peace. Suddenly, the guy stood up and, waving his hand, summoned a huge pillar of light. Lynn was able to defend himself and noticed that with those eyes, the guy saw all the magic he used. A fight ensued where this guy only counterattacked. Now Lynn realized that this was the power of the Ludwig family's bloodline magic. Belle Cidius. By simply observing the flow of magic, a person can determine what kind of magic the opponent is using, and if their magic skills are equal, the one who uses it better gets the advantage. This Belle Cidius is a legendary eye that only 3 people have opened in the entire history of the Empire. If Belle Cidius is the ability to recognize an opponent's magic, then Belle Curious is the ability to steal it. The reason why the Ludwig family became known as magic thieves is because of this eye. Standing on his feet, Lynn thought that the goal of childhood had now been achieved, and he thought that without magical power and endurance, he would not become a great magician. Returning to the house, Lynn immediately went to the library where Kevin found him. The man asked him if he was interested in the family's lineage of magic. He asked that it was, of course, a bit early, but would he like to try to learn it? Lynn replied that he would like to, thinking that it wouldn't hurt to study the theory beforehand. Kevin replied that then from today, Elin would be his mentor, but only while he was at the academy, and when he returned, he would teach him personally. Lynn asked again about Elin, trying to search through Rain's memory to find who she was. Nodding, Kevin said that she was a wonderful person, taught it to Lighten, had great magical talent, and most of all, she was Aunt Elin, who loved her nephew more than anything in the world. He said that they met her when they were 6 years old and someone came into the library. A girl appeared in the library, frowning and looking ahead. She walked up to Lynn and looked at him intently, and he just moved away from her. Elin snorted in annoyance and asked if the genius professor Elin Ludwig had come personally to train some unloved child. She grabbed the boy by the head and asked him menacingly if he was ready. The girl asked the boy if he knew who she was, to which he replied that she was Aunt Elin. Turning to the window, the girl exclaimed that he should now address her as Professor Elin, the great genius, and she said that she could not stand slow-witted people who did not understand at first. She glared at him and told him not to ask her any questions after she had taught him once. Thus began Lynn's training in the bloodline magic of the Ludwig family. She did not enroll so that it would not be stolen by other mages, so it could only be learned from family members. Elin sighed heavily and said that she would now demonstrate. Then she opened her eyes, which were shining like bright sparks. Looking into her eyes, Lynn felt a strange feeling, as if his whole body was being frozen. His eyes widened. He thought with admiration that this was the very same Belle Cidius. He exclaimed in admiration, while Elin closed her eyes and laughed smugly. Then she screamed that in order to use this technique, one had to calculate 3 spells at the same time, something that someone like him couldn't even dream of. Lynn exclaimed that he could do it, to which the girl exclaimed that he was too arrogant. Elin, satisfied with the boy's reaction, wrote down several formulas. It was an analysis of magic. Leafing through the notes, Lynn noticed that it was more theoretical than he expected. If the founder of the family, Ludwig, had not imposed genetic restrictions, then Lynn could have taken advantage of this. Leaning towards her nephew, Alice asked him if it was too difficult for him since he didn't even understand what it meant, to which he replied that he just needed time to understand. Alice had not expected such an answer, and so she hesitated to do the honor of helping. Lynn bowed to his aunt and thanked her for guiding him, and he said that he would now figure it out on his own. Alice asked him if he didn't need any guidance, and when there was no response, she told him not to ignore her. Lynn sat down at the table and began to read the notes. Alice got angry at being ignored and walked away, saying that he could do whatever he wanted, but it wouldn't work anyway. After a while, she sat down opposite the boy and began to read a book. Lynn tried to make sense of the notes and got stuck at one point. Suddenly, Alice snatched the paper from his hands without saying anything. She quickly moved her pencil across the paper, her face expressionless. After a couple of minutes, she placed the sheet on the table in front of the boy. The girl buried her face in her book again while Lynn looked at her in shock. After a while, Lynn thought again, unable to immediately understand what to do, and the sheet was again torn right out from under the boy's nose. And again, Alice placed the sheet of paper with the written solution in front of him. The girl buried her face in the book again. Lynn tried to understand what was happening. He was trying to figure out if this was how modern magical education worked or if she was testing him, while Raina's mother was secretly watching them. After some time, Alice announced a break. She left the room, and from the side, a voice was heard calling Rain. Lynn asked her what happened. The woman asked him if he thought Aunt Elin was unusual, to which he replied that she was very unusual. The woman said that Elin is not really honest. She tries to teach him everything. So even if he already knows something, he should ask her questions. She remembered that Elin was the same when she followed her and Kevin around. A few minutes later, Elin returned and sat down at the table, burying her face in a book. Looking up, Lynn noticed his aunt sneaking a peek at his notes. When the girl noticed that the boy had noticed her gaze, she immediately turned away. But after some time, when Lynn returned to the notes, she began to peek again. Lynn thought that Elin was very annoying, even more annoying than 6-year-old Siri. Finally, Lynn decided to follow his mother's advice and approached his aunt, saying that she didn't quite understand that part. Elin immediately threw the book aside and screamed that if he didn't even know this, then their family was doomed. And she asked what exactly he didn't understand. Lynn pointed his finger at the text on the page, to which Elin immediately told him how he should solve it. Laughing, she said that he should use this formula, and then he would be able to solve it much faster. Lynn apologized to her, and she continued, asking him about what he did before he was 9 years old. Lynn resigned himself to his fate and continued asking his aunt. Elin's teaching was such that it required a lot of effort, but thanks to her, he significantly reduced the time spent studying theory and gained practical experience. On the 10th day after receiving Elin's instructions, he felt a burning pain in the retina of his eye. He felt all the blood in his body rush to his head, the world slowly turning blood red. And then it happened. The eyes, glowing red, were engraved with the mark of death. All information about everything in the universe comes in the form of formulas. Lynn used a fire spell and immediately a fireball appeared on his palm, and on top of it were numbers. Lynn thought about what he realized was that in the eyes of the young wizard, all his magic looked like numbers. He said it was really amazing. Elin, stunned, asked the boy if he could really achieve this in just 10 days. Even after specialized training, it took Elin 7 years to master Belle Cidius. They said it would take 70 years to master Belle Curious. Elin thought about how in just 10 days, Rain had gone from a blank slate, knowing nothing, to using multiple spells at once. She thought that he could rival Lynn, who was called a master of simultaneous summoning. Looking at him, she thought that he might be a genius. Elin went to Kevin, who muttered that his son had awakened Belle Cidius in just 10 days. The girl told her brother that thanks to Rain, the Ludwig family can become a leading family of magicians. He is really amazing. Elin walked out of her brother's office, slamming the door. Kevin said that as a father he had nothing more to teach him. After that, Kevin called out to Yud, and a black figure appeared behind the red curtain. The man told Yud to send a message to his father. Yud asked him if he was referring to the former head of the family, to which Kevin asked him if there was any problem with that. The man immediately replied that that was not what he meant. Kevin said to pass on a request to guide his grandson, who has an innate talent, on the right path. Smiling, Yud noted that Kevin had truly gone through fire and water for his son. He said he would do as ordered. Kevin just smirked in response. Thus ended spring and a short summer began. Looking out the window, Lynn thought about how this summer seemed to last for about a year. Dark clouds covered the continent, pouring rain day after day. Lynn was incredibly busy that summer. During the day, he studied household magic from Elin. At every opportunity, he taught Ciri the basics of magic. And at night, he concentrated on training his physical and magical strength. The development of modern magic that Lynn learned from Elin and from books was truly astounding. And for Lynn, a person living 300 years ago, it was quite shocking. He noted that such complex formulas were simplified to such an extent that the activation time was reduced and the power was greatly increased. The level of magic has increased significantly compared to 300 years ago. But now Lynn can lose to a modern 4-star mage. He thought that magic grows with time, and with his current state, becoming a 7-star magician in this era is absolutely impossible. He needs strength and incredible knowledge. At dinner, Lynn told his father he had a favor to ask, and Kevin asked again. The boy asked his father to send him to the city of magicians. He said that it would take about 3 years. The parents' eyes immediately popped out of their heads. While chewing bread, Ciri asked her brother if he really wanted to go somewhere, to which he said yes. He said that he was thinking of going to the Golden Rose in the City of Magicians, where the best magic university, Deleighton, is located. He asked his father if he would let him go. Ciri rushed to her brother, screaming for him not to leave. Kevin said that was impossible. He told the boy to think about his age because he was only 10 years old. It was too early to leave home. Kevin said that children from magical families enter Deleighton when they turn 16. Then it is not too late to go to the City of Magicians. And he also said that he had already scheduled a very important meeting. Taking a letter out of his vest, Kevin told his son that this letter was sent by his father, his grandfather. Elin, who was sitting at the table and eating a steak, immediately froze with a piece of meat in her mouth. Choking, she coughed silently and asked her brother again, to which he told her to wipe her mouth before speaking. Lynn immediately guessed who his grandfather could be. Kevin said that in their family, only 3 people awakened the Belle Curious. Lynn's thoughts were confirmed, and he thought that this was indeed the Belle Curious Scalzi Ludwig motivator. Kevin told his son that his grandfather would personally guide him through Belle Curious. Alice rushed to sob into her mother's skirt, and Elin began to wipe her mouth while the man told his son that he should first visit his grandfather. After some time, the carriage reached a huge mansion. Kevin and Lynn got out of the carriage and walked down the corridors, Lynn looking around. Kevin told his son that he would go and greet his grandfather first. After a while, the man came out of the room and called Rain to meet his grandfather. The man standing by the window turned his red eyes behind him. He raised his hand and pulled out 2 fingers, around which red triangles of the spell glowed. Suddenly, he dropped his hand sharply, which activated the spell. Lynn was immediately overcome with an unusual sensation. Everything around shook. The chandeliers on the ceiling swayed. Books began to fall off the shelves. Lynn wondered in fear what this old man was thinking. Meanwhile, Scalzi had no intention of retreating. His hand glowed even brighter with the same spell. Lynn decided to put his thoughts aside and respond to such a gesture. He raised his hands and they glowed blue. But the next moment, Lynn's spell in his hands faded away, as if it had never been there. The man said that it was Belle Curious, and Lynn involuntarily shuddered at the voice. Looking at the man, he noticed that his eyes were glowing with a bright red light. Scalzi said that this spell can control visible magic at will. After recovering from the shock, Lynn smiled weakly, admiring the man. Lynn exclaimed in delight, in response to which his grandfather asked him if he wanted to try it too, while Kevin only sighed understandingly. Scalzi's eyes dimmed, and he said that mastering Belle Curious was not enough. In order to use it properly, a master must fully understand it. He asked the boy what level he was at now. Lynn replied that he could barely do a speed calculation of a 3rd-star spell, and he himself thought that he could handle spells up to 5 stars, but Scalzi also said that it was almost amazing. He said that, however, Belle Curious requires a huge amount of magical power, so in his current state, he was still far from that. In response to this, Lynn asked about it being just a long way, and he asked if it was impossible. Scalzi was caught off guard when the boy screamed at him to take him to this level. Scalzi said his training will be very hard, so he will learn the right way. He said that his first greeting was too rude. He apologized for it and greeted them. Kevin was about to leave when his father called him and said that they could have a drink together after they confirmed Rain's suitability. Kevin, not expecting this, turned to look at his father with wide eyes. Scalzi did not look at his son, but raised his hand to wave to him. Kevin bowed low to his father, saying goodbye and thanking him. After some time, winter came and snow fell in flakes to the ground. At this time, Scalzi and Lynn were practicing outside. The man raised his hand to the sky. A bright flash was shining in his palm, and he exclaimed to his grandson that he should be able to use Belle Curious freely. Lynn rushed back as his grandfather shouted at him to cast the spell quickly and not screw it up. Scalzi's lightning struck the ground, knocking the boy off his feet, and the man screamed, asking his grandson if he was just going to stand there and watch as the enemy's spell was activated. And Scalzi himself thought with admiration that this boy had an amazing talent. If you teach him one thing, he will comprehend 1,000. He is a genius who masters in one go what would take others a month. All that remains is to master the use of eyes and develop magic. Lynn ran around his grandfather as he told him that he had to risk his life in his studies in order to grow significantly. Lynn shouted back at him that he understood everything. A bright fireball glowed in Scalzi's hand, and he told his grandson that he would release it now. Looking at his grandson, he told him that if he couldn't dodge, he would die. Lynn ground his feet, preparing to meet the spell. Rushing forward, Scalzi gave the boy the signal to take action. Lynn screamed loudly as he used Belle Cidius, and his eyes glowed a bright yellow. Meanwhile, the fireball was getting closer and closer to him. Scalzi shouted loudly at his grandson to hurry up. Lynn stared at the orb, thinking that he needed to master his opponent's magic with Belle Cidius, and then manipulate it with Belle Curious. The ball came closer and closer when suddenly a bright red light lit up in the boy's eyes. Everything in his eyes began to move in slow motion. The fireball disintegrated into numbers. The grandfather who stood behind turned into a silhouette, covered in numbers. Lynn's eyes widened as he realized that he had been able to activate the Belle Curious, the universe being converted into equations and fed directly into his brain. He thought that now he needed to change the formulas for his provision. He held out his hand to begin changing the spell. Information immediately appeared in his head that the array consists of 2 triangles. The designated runic symbol is Rudihin. The range is 23 kilometer, the size is 17 axles. The solution immediately came to his mind, and a moment later the fireball exploded in a bright flash. After finishing casting the spell, Lynn began to fall from exhaustion, but Scalzi managed to catch him. Breathing heavily, Lynn asked his grandfather if he could do it. Scalzi responded by joyfully exclaiming that everything had worked out. Now all he had to do was strengthen his magical power. Lynn smiled faintly as the man continued, admiring the fact that he was able to awaken Belle Curious at only 14 years old. Scalzi thought that he had barely reached this level at 39. This boy could rewrite the history of the Empire. After some time, when Lynn came to his senses, Scalzi said that he would not interfere in his life but wanted to give advice. With a serious face, he told him that when he turned 16, he should definitely enroll into Lighten. Lynn didn't answer. He looked away and thought that he was no longer interested. Scalzi told him that if he graduated from the university with the highest level, he would have a chance to meet Archmage Lynn. Lynn agreed, but said that he was not very interested, and he thought that it was time for them to stop mocking the dead. Scalzi said he felt the same way, but Esther's character left a letter. Isn't he interested in its contents? Lynn froze in shock. He couldn't believe that Esther had left him a letter. Scalzi told his grandson that no one had ever awakened Belle Curious at 14 years old. With his abilities, he should be able to read the letter. At that moment, Lynn was so stunned that he could only listen blankly. Looking back, he could tell that this was the beginning. It became a story about a journey along the path of former comrades, following Esther's letter. Scalzi walked back into the house and Lynn, coming out of her stupor, ran after him. There was about half a year left before the entrance exams to Delayton, so Lynn decided to take this opportunity to find out what and where to visit when he went south. Kevin asked his son if he planned to stay in the magical city after the exams, to which he replied that he was going to, because all the knowledge was collected there. At the end of the year, the notoriously difficult entrance exam to Delayton takes place, and those who pass it begin their first semester in May. Lynn's attention was drawn to a falling leaf when his mother asked him if he was sure about it, as he was worried about being there without security. Kevin told her that Rain's skills were exceptional and there would be no danger if he followed the known path. Looking up at the sky, Lynn wondered if he would ever be able to call this conversation a memory. On the 13th day of his journey, Lynn found himself in a small town somewhere in the forest. Namely, he found himself in the southern part of the Holy Empire, the Garum region, in a small town where there were many taverns and inns. And what's interesting is that all the people passing by were wearing bamboo hats. When Lynn asked one man why everyone was wearing bamboo hats, the man asked him if he didn't know about Lynn's caravan. The man said that long ago their first leader received help from the archmage Lynn. He said that as a sign of gratitude they wear bamboo hats. The guy's attention was drawn to the staff behind the man's back as he continued talking about how this was a trading group with such a great history. Rolling his eyes, Lynn wondered who this first leader was. Maybe he would remember when he heard his name. Lynn asked the man what such respected chickens were doing in such a small town. The man replied that there was a problem on the road leading to the sunlit highway, and ferocious monsters appeared and dozens of people went missing. So they wait for the Lord's forces to come and destroy them. Monsters are creatures whose essence has been distorted by the abyss. They resemble animals but have a much more grotesque appearance and dangerous magical abilities. And no matter how many of them are destroyed, they never disappear. Lynn walked away, thinking that as long as this monster wasn't a top-tier one, he had nothing to worry about. Night fell and Lynn walked through the bamboo forest. Suddenly he noticed that someone was definitely watching him. However, nothing attacked. Perhaps this creature sensed the difference in magical power, like an animal instinct. Lynn thought idly that he could deal with these monsters, but it wasn't his concern. The monster-slaying team will take care of that. Lynn walked on, memories coming back to life in his head. He remembered Esther pointing somewhere on the map, suggesting a route. An irritated Lynn listened to how they wanted to stop by a flower field on the way. Unable to bear it any longer, he shouted, asking them what they were doing. He reminded them that two groups of warriors who had crossed to the continent before them had been destroyed fighting at the front. Because of this, the front line has stalled and they are barely holding on, waiting for help from others. Frida took a drag on her smoke as Esther said that she understood everything. A legion of red and yellow dragons were heading to the battlefield, and all the strong mercenaries had crossed the sea for honor and glory. Lynn exclaimed that they also needed to hurry, to which Esther responded that that was why she was saying that. Because now that all the strong ones were gone, monsters began to run around the continent as if they had been waiting for this moment. Lynn exclaimed that they were at best a C or B level. They didn't have time to deal with such things. Esther told the boy that there are many people in this world who desperately need help. Even in what seems like a trifle, it makes no difference to ask for help. Covering his face with his hand, Lynn remembered Esther's words about how she hoped he would grow up to help people like him. Lynn muttered that even after 300 years they were still annoying. The boy sat down to rest, a spell glowing in his hand. Lynn muttered the words quietly, activating the spell. Our seal in his hand shone even brighter, ready to act. Lynn lowered his hand and the seal entered the ground and rushed forward to find the monster. The guy remained sitting in the depths of the night forest. Finally, after some time, he heard a loud roar in his head and ordered the seal to bring the monster here. Something flashed like a dark shadow above the bamboo, and something heavy fell in front of Lynn. Looking down, he noticed a white monster that was bound by his spell. Lynn frowned and asked if that was what he was calling a threat when the monster started growling at him. Squeezing his hand so that the spell began to squeeze the monster, breaking bones, the boy told him that he had already killed countless of his relatives. The monster began to writhe in pain as his body was squeezed even more. Lynn told him that he would let him go if he promised not to harm people anymore. All he got in response was a roar, and Lynn said he still didn't understand him. Lynn left behind the monster's body, cut into pieces, and he said it didn't help, it was just out of boredom. The border between the central and southern regions of the empire is the Badantio Ridge, and as soon as Lynn stepped onto it, he was immediately attacked by monsters. Lynn thought with irritation at how the insignificant beast dared to look down on him. But suddenly, instead of the guy's spell, arrows started flying at the monsters. Turning around, Lynn noticed two people standing above. The figure and hairstyle of one of them seemed familiar to Lynn, so he inadvertently called out to Kaze. The strangers hurried to jump down. Someone asked Lynn if he was okay, and the guy smelled alcohol. A young man, who didn't look like Kaze at all, told Lynn that monsters often appeared in this place, and he asked him if no one had warned him on the way here. The second stranger also jumped down, asking why anyone had to warn him, and he said smugly that they, the descendants of the Great Palace, guard it. Lynn stood frozen in place, just listening to the strangers and thinking that there was no way it could have been Kaze. Scratching his head, he finally said that he didn't know what school they were from, but they helped him, so he was grateful. And he decided to ask them if this was really the Badantio mountain range. After exchanging glances, the strangers suddenly burst out laughing without answering the guy. A little angry, Lynn shouted at them, asking what they were laughing at. The second stranger said that so much time had passed since this ridge became Kislanten, and he still called it Badantio. Kislanten means mountain range of the Palace of Kaze. After defeating the Abyss, Kaze seems to have taken root here. The strangers said that they were students of the archery school founded by Kaze. They also said that traditionally this passage is guarded by him, who was recognized by the school director. Watching the drunk guys, Lynn couldn't help but laugh, thinking, is drunk archery really the main subject of this school? What did they do to be assigned here? One of the guys put his arm around Lynn's shoulders, telling him that he had come at the right time because today was a festival, a day when everyone could drink free alcohol, and he needed to experience the taste of alcohol if he wanted to become an adult. He continued by saying that alcohol was the path to the sun and the moon, to which his companion wearily remarked that he was such a cultured man. The second guy walked away telling his partner that he can't even think about skipping his shift today talking nonsense. They still have to guard this place. To which the first guy asked how they could let this kid go alone. Grabbing Lynn by the scruff of the neck, the boy ran away, shouting to his comrade that he would simply take him to the entrance of the village and return. Walking through the forest, the guy said that the road was hidden because of fallen leaves. Although they tried to clean them up, there were endless amounts of them this year. The guy continued to chat, but Lynn was no longer listening to him, looking around. Listening to the boy again, he heard him tell him that if he climbed the wooden stairs from here, he would find the training room. He said that if you follow the path you can get to the village, and at the fork there was a stone that looked like a tombstone. Upon reading the name on the stone, Lynn immediately felt his heart break into pieces and his hope disappear. The guy asked Lynn why he shouldn't make a wish if he was going somewhere. When Lynn asked again, the guy asked him if he really didn't know. And then he said that at the Tomb of Kaze, people usually make a wish, asking for protection. Not believing his ears, Lynn told the guy to stop joking, to which the guy asked why he was joking. With a trembling voice, Lynn said that it was strange because tombs were not built in the middle of the road, and this Kaze was a hero. The guy asked him if he really didn't know the history of this tomb, if he was from this country at all. He asked him if he knew that among Caius's comrades was the Archmage Lynn. He continued by saying that it was a well-known fact so he should know, but Lynn was said to be very shy, which gave the real Lynn a shock. The guy said that Kaze believed that Lynn would return even after death. They said that if the grave had been in the village, Lynn might not have come because he was embarrassed, so Kaze asked to be buried here. Lynn remembered his moments with Kaze, how he got angry at his snoring and the smell of alcohol. He remembered how, in the middle of their journey, he taught him various symbols. Kaze loved to ruffle Lynn's hair, which only made Lynn angry and yell at him to stop. But now the guy involuntarily patted himself on the head. Looking at the stone, he wondered if Kaze knew that this farewell was forever. Lynn continued to deny it, thinking that he had promised to return. Kaze appeared before his eyes, but when he turned around, his face began to melt, revealing his skull. Suddenly, Lynn turned around and ran away. Like a madman, the guy ran through the forest without paying attention to the road until he tripped. He fell to the ground, but was in no hurry to get up, breathing heavily. As the sun began to set again, Lynn reached the cliff and sat down on its edge. He told himself that he had to go back to Kaze's grave and say goodbye. Remembering Frida, he thought that even if it was already late, he had to go and tell her that he was back. Remembering Esther, he thought that he should say that he was sorry. He saw Kaze before his eyes and thought that he should go back and ask for forgiveness. The sun set behind the horizon, but Lynn still didn't move from his place. He just lay down on the ground. He recalled how Kaze was able to find an eagle in the sky in pitch darkness. All the guys were wondering how Kaze could aim when he was drunk. When Kaze came down from his drunkenness, his hands began to shake so he could not aim. He recalled how Esther had told him that Kaze had no language and therefore could not speak. He remembered how loudly Kaze snored at night, leaving everyone else unable to sleep. Remembering all this, Lynn couldn't help but laugh. But then he remembered their last moment together. But the guy kept laughing louder and louder, Soon this laughter turned into loud sobs. Lynn raised his hands and covered his face with them. After some time, he rose from the ground and wandered through the forest. He walked towards the village where he again encountered the tombstone. Rustling dry leaves, Lynn came closer, a bright red spell shining on his hand. Gritting his teeth, Lynn smashed the stone with a sharp movement of his hand. Burnt leaves rose into the air, burning to ashes there. But the stone remained standing in the middle of the road, as if untouched by anything. The sun set again and Lynn turned and walked away, making no more attempts to destroy the stone. He mentally apologized to Case, thinking that it wasn't because he was shy, and all because he lacks courage. He lacks the courage to face them and ask for forgiveness. Without looking back once, Lynn walked away, feeling the past recede even further. Autumn in the south was simply amazing. Under such an autumnal summer-autumn sky, a glittering city spread out before Lynn. It was the magical city of the Golden Rose, in the center of which the University of Delayton was built. This proud was interesting to Lynn from his past life, but he did not live up to his expectations. Everywhere there were shouts from vendors trying to sell books on magic and teaching aids. All sorts of charlatans offered people tools to enhance magic and rare items found in the dungeon. All knowledge passes through the Golden Rose is a phrase that suits the status of this place where everything gathers. Lynn sat down next to one of the merchants and asked him how much this item cost. The seller replied that it only cost 10 coins, causing Lynn to ask again. Smiling, Lynn said that he paid at least 80 coins for it back then. Suddenly, the seller called him, saying that the bell had already rung, which meant the exam would soon begin. Lynn hurried to give the money to the seller, almost forgetting why he came to this city. Suddenly, a scream was heard, and a man flew past in front of the guy. People were shouting for someone to catch the thief. The thief ran further through the crowd. Lynn thought that the security here was not very good. Turning away, he thought that this was a big city, so the guards should be able to handle it. But then his thoughts were interrupted by the fact that someone crashed into him. Having collided with the guy, the old woman lost her balance and fell to the ground. Lynn apologized excitedly and said that he had to go already, he was late. The old woman quietly muttered that it was a family heirloom and that her grandson needed it for the entrance exam. Continuing to mutter, asking for help, the old woman stood up and walked on. Turning away, Lynn thought that now was not the time. He had an exam. But suddenly he heard Esther's voice telling him to help her. Coming closer to the old woman, Lynn asked her if the man had stolen something from her. Frowning, the guy stopped the old woman, telling her to wait here. After chasing the thief, Lynn climbed onto the roof and flew further with the help of a spell. Lynn was burning with anger that he still had so much to do, and he was doing this. A bright flash of light flashed in his hand, and he told the thief that now he would turn to ashes. But before he could do anything, a voice was heard from behind and someone's hand touched his shoulder. The girl pushed him away and ran on, shouting at him to move away. She flew down from the roof, and a bright flash shone in her raised hands. Suddenly, the thief slowed down, noticing that sand was starting to rise in front of him. The man looked around in confusion, wondering where the sand came from. Meanwhile, the sand rose higher and higher. The girl shouted loudly to the thief across the street that stealing someone else's property in the Golden Rose was brave, she should give him credit. But he chose the wrong day. The girl stood on her head made of sand, and under her feet were two sand knights holding a sword, and she exclaimed that the thief was finished today. She continued her heroic speech with a smug grin, saying that it would all end for him today, because he had been caught by none other than Kristaten. Lynn looked the girl up and down. He noticed her confidence in the sand swirling around her, and he realized she was Warden. The Varden family is located on the eastern edge of the border, like the Ludwig family. It is one of the 5 families of mages. Before Lynn regained his memories, they met several times at family gatherings, the girl telling him to put in a little effort to not live like a loser. She pointed her finger at him angrily and shouted that he was a descendant of magicians, even the eldest son. She asked him if he was really not ashamed at all. Lynn ignored her every time. Every time they met, she always acted smart, so he called her a nerd. Lynn wondered how it was that she was already wearing a uniform since they were the same age. And in the meantime, the thief decided to strike back. Using a wind spell, the thief destroyed the sand tower and the knights, causing Kristaten to fly down. But the wind currents did not stop there. They began to swirl madly along the street, lifting other people into the air. One of the children that were there rose into the air far from its mother, but before it could fly far, it was caught by the tree roots. Using a spell, Lynn, who was still on the roof of the house, returned the boy to his mother. Lynn raised his head and looked at the thief again, his eyes glowing red, activating Belle Cidius. Looking at the thief, who had strange bracelets on his arm, he thought that this thief was a magician, and he also had quite decent magical power. The guy's gaze involuntarily caught on these strange bracelets, which shimmered golden in the sunlight. Kristaten didn't think of giving up. Frowning, she raised her hands again, activating the spell, and shouted at the thief that he was very good for a thief. She screamed at him to try and block this then, and then she quickly moved her hands with a bright flash shining between them. A little surprised by this outburst, Lynn noticed that it was a 2-star magic that she even used mentally. The girl hit her palm against another palm, causing an even brighter flash. The whole city was shaken, and ordinary residents began to look around in confusion. Behind the girl, the ground began to crack. If the Ludwig family is known as magic thieves, then the Varden family is known as magic commanders. Breaking the earth into pieces, something rose from underneath it with a loud crack. A sand golem appeared behind the girl, its eye glowing red, and Lynn thought that the Varden family's bloodline magic was earth magic. Kristaten asked the surprised thief if he would try to brag again now. But suddenly the golem's eyes flashed with a different red light. The thief raised his hand with the bracelets from under his cloak and shouted that with this he was invincible. His hand glowed with a dark light, and then something pierced the golem through and through. The golem's eyes went dark, and he was ready to collapse as a heavy mass onto the ground. But after that, the golem's eyes flashed red again, and he didn't care about anything. Noticing this, Kristaten turned to the thief and told him not to even think that he would fall from such an attack, while the golem prepared to attack its mistress. The thief smiled slyly, and the bracelets on his hand once again began to shine with a dark glow. But before the golem could strike, something flew into his hand, smashing it into tiny pieces. Lynn appeared in front of Kristaten and said that if he showed his trump card so early, he could get a counterattack. Attacking the golem further, the boy said that just because someone used a spell first, it doesn't mean they've already won. Lynn didn't think of retreating. His hand twisted again, but this time with the blue light of the spell. The thief screamed desperately, ordering the golem to kill those children. The golem obeyed the orders of its new owner and decided to strike with its other hand. Lynn, in response to this, decided to use a fire spell in a circular shape. Raising his hands to the sky, the boy launched a fountain straight into the golem's face. Kristaten, who, like Lynn, was soaking wet, asked the guy if he was a water mage. She said that although the water element is the natural enemy of the earth element, her golem does not fall from a 1-star spell. And to confirm this, the golem rose to its feet again, its eyes glowing with a menacing red light. The thief laughed like a madman and asked how they could boast of such a thing. Kristaten pushed the guy away and rushed forward again. Meanwhile, the golem did not stand still either, and, at the command of its master, rushed forward. Lynn once again put his hands forward, using another spell, and the golem was again met by a strong stream of water. Kristaten, who was once again behind the guy, shouted at him that he should already understand that this doesn't work. The man still wouldn't stop and continued to shout at her to stop wasting time and just die. But Lynn didn't give up. He continued to use the spell, pressing on the water golem. After a couple of seconds, sounds were heard and cracks began to run across the golem's body. Noticing this, the guy began to spray water even harder at the stone golem. The golem stepped back, and then he noticed that his last hand was beginning to crumble before his eyes. However, she was still intact enough to strike again, which is what the golem decided to do. Lynn grabbed Kristaten by the collar and quickly jumped to the side, dragging her behind him. The golem's fist hit the ground with a loud thud, shattering it into pieces. The thief used his bracelets again. Lynn thought that he was stealing someone else's magic, but he couldn't use his own. Kristaten, lying on the ground, screamed, asking the guy what he was doing because it was dangerous. But Lynn had already jumped to his feet, and a bright flash of a spell shone between his palms. Kristaten noticed that the 1-star spell had only been cast a few seconds ago. Lynn began to transform the spell, looking for a solution to this situation. The guy changed the law of the spell. He raised his hands up, and the spell shone even brighter. Lynn released the spell from his hands, and it crawled across the ground, breaking it into pieces. From these cracks, plant roots emerged and wrapped around the golem's body. After a couple of minutes, the golem's body was securely tied and pressed to the ground. One of the roots slid across the golem's face, breaking his red eyes. The golem was neutralized. The thief wanted to rush forward, but roots burst out from under the ground again. Approaching the shackled man, Lynn tore off his bracelet and asked what it was. Taking a closer look, the guy realized that it was an artifact, and it looked interesting. The thief shouted at him to give it back, to which Lynn replied that he had stolen it. The guy thought that stealing control over the enemy's magic was similar to Belle's Cidius. There were 2 magic circles engraved on the stone, which meant that he could steal up to 2-star magic. In a panic, the thief asked the boy who he was and how he was able to cast magic so quickly. But Lynn didn't answer him and just turned around, walking away and thinking that even if he told him, he wouldn't believe him. Approaching the old woman, Lynn returned the artifact to her, telling her to pass this thing on. The old woman took the artifact back with tears in her eyes, and the crowd erupted in joyful shouts. People began to shout compliments to Lynn and Lady Varden. Hearing about Lady Varden, Lynn immediately remembered the exam and froze. Without paying attention to anything else, the boy broke loose and ran away. An unknown person in a cloak approached the chained thief and put a sword to his throat. Then this unknown person in a cloak approached Krista, who was still sitting on the ground. Krista recognized the stranger as Professor Caroline, who told her that she had made a mistake today. The woman said that it was great to be confident, but she shouldn't have used the golem so hastily. Getting up from the ground, the girl replied that she knew and would be more careful next time. And then she happily asked the professor if she had seen that boy, and noticed that his magic casting speed was almost the same as the professor's. The woman replied that he might even be faster than her. But then Krista said that the guy didn't seem that strong during the selection. Professor Caroline asked why the guy was here if he had come for the exam. Krista asked her what she was talking about, to which she replied that the exam had already started. Krista sullenly asked the professor if there was any other way she could not accept it. She asked if she could be given some slack if she was late because she was helping someone. The woman asked her since when she thought so much about others. In response, the girl exclaimed that a person like that guy should exist to make things more interesting. And she asked with a grin whether it wouldn't be better for the school to have interesting characters. Professor Caroline made no reply to this, but soon agreed. Back in her office, Caroline looked over Rain's file, which stated that he had no experience in magical competitions and no significant achievements in other areas. Perhaps he is a genius prodigy who can become the White One sent to the Ludwig family from heaven. But then the woman noticed that this guy had been Scalzi Ludwig's assistant for 3 years. She was a little surprised by this, because he was a former great magician and the head of Osiris. It didn't matter to him if someone was his relative. Everything depended on talent and strength. He ruthlessly rejected those who failed to produce results. Professor Caroline wondered if he was just an assistant. Then why was he called a prodigy by the 8 great schools? Thinking about this, the woman smiled to herself.